The Roman Dodecahedron mystery is finally solved, and it's worse than expected. In the summer of 2023, a volunteer digging in a muddy field in the small English village of Norton Disney pulled out a fist-sized lump of bronze that stopped an entire archaeology group in its tracks. It had 12 flat faces. It had holes of different sizes cut into every one of them, and it had 20 small knobs, one on every corner, like tiny bronze knuckles. Within days, the story was everywhere, because everyone who has ever encountered one of these objects ends up asking the exact same question: what is it? Not what did it look like, not what was it made of, what was it for? And nearly 300 years after the very first one was pulled out of the ground in England, we still, genuinely, do not have an answer. Not because nobody has looked, because everybody has looked, and the harder people look, the stranger the silence around this object gets. Stick with me for the next few minutes, because this isn't going to be one of those videos that hands you a tidy solution wrapped in a bow. It's better than that, and honestly, a little more unsettling. Because what the real evidence shows is not a single genius answer hiding in plain sight. It's a pattern of contradictions that has quietly broken every explanation we've thrown at it for 3 centuries. And by the end of this, you'll understand exactly why the words function unknown are still, to this day, the official answer stamped onto museum placards across Europe. Let's start with the object itself, because the shape alone is strange enough to earn its reputation. Picture something you could close your hand around, roughly the size of a large orange or a small grapefruit. 12 faces, each one a pentagon, meeting at sharp edges. In the center of every pentagon, a circular hole, and this is the detail that hooks people immediately. The holes are not the same size. Some are wide enough to slide 2 fingers through. Others are barely wider than a pencil. At every one of the 20 points where 3 faces come together, there's a small cast bronze ball, almost like a tiny foot or a stud. The whole thing is hollow inside. Hold one up to a light source and you can see straight through it, hole to opposing hole, into an empty dark chamber at its center. More than 100 of these have now been recovered, roughly 130 as of the most recent counts, and almost all of them come from one specific stretch of the old Roman world. Not Rome, not Italy, not one has ever turned up anywhere in the Roman heartland. They come almost exclusively from the empire's northwestern frontier, what is now France, Germany, Belgium, Switzerland, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, and Britain. The cold, wet, heavily garrisoned edge of Roman territory, where legions were stationed for generations and where Rome's grip on the local population was never quite total. And here is the detail that turns this from a curiosity into a genuine historical puzzle. The Romans were relentless record keepers. We have their engineering manuals, their military logs, their tax ledgers, letters between soldiers complaining about socks and underwear, inventories of kitchen equipment, treatises on farming, architecture, plumbing, siege warfare. This was a civilization that wrote almost everything down. And across all of that surviving material, spanning centuries, there is not one confirmed mention of these objects. No name for them survives, no instructions, no drawing, no entry in any inventory or supply list that we can point to with confidence and say, this is what they called it. This is what it did. A society that manufactured well over 100 of these things, in multiple provinces, using real skill and real bronze, apparently never wrote a single sentence about them that has survived to us. That silence is the first real mystery, and it's the one that every theory eventually has to explain, and mostly fails to. So naturally, over the last 2.5 centuries, people have proposed a long list of guesses. A candle holder, though there's no soot or wax residue found inside any of them, which is exactly what you'd expect if a flame had ever burned there. A children's toy, or a dice-throwing cup, though the open-faced shape makes no practical sense for either. a scepter head for religious processions, a gauge for measuring the diameter of pipes or coins, since Roman coinage did vary in size across different mints and periods, a rangefinder that a soldier might hold at arm's length to estimate distance to a target, a tool for knitting or looping cord, sometimes called the Viking knitting theory, since the graded holes and knobs could plausibly help someone braid metal wire into chainmail or jewelry, a technique that happens to be associated with exactly the northern European regions where these objects turn up, a candlestick for religious ritual, an astronomical instrument for calculating the date to plant winter wheat, a theory proposed by Dutch researcher Cyril Wagemans in 2010, who actually built a working bronze replica and tested it in the field across several planting seasons to see whether it could help determine the autumn equinox. Every one of these theories has genuine, thoughtful people behind it, and some of them, like the wheat planting theory and the knitting theory, have actually been tested with working replicas rather than just argued about from an armchair. That matters because it separates real experimental archaeology from pure speculation. But here's the uncomfortable truth that the current research keeps running into. None of these theories fit all of the evidence, and the reason is almost the opposite of what you'd expect from a story like this. It's not that the objects are too perfect for any mundane explanation, it's that they are far too inconsistent. This is the part that actually surprises most people once they dig into the real archaeological record, because the popular version of this story that circulates online usually claims the opposite. You'll find videos and articles insisting that laser scans revealed impossible, machine-grade precision, identical holes graded in some secret mathematical ratio, knobs measured to the hundredth of a millimeter, an ancient standard shared silently across provinces. It's a great story. It is also not supported by what researchers who study these artifacts have actually published. The real, documented finding, confirmed by the team that examined the newly discovered Norton-Disney dodecahedron and by researchers who have studied the wider collection, is that there is no standard size, no standard shape, no consistent metal composition, and no consistent level of craftsmanship across the surviving examples. Some are beautifully finished, others are comparatively crude. They range from about 4 centimeters across to well over 8. The hole sizes vary from piece to piece, with no shared formula that anyone has been able to demonstrate. In other words, whatever these objects were for, it wasn't something that required a fixed, precise, universal specification, because the specification simply isn't there when you actually measure the full set. That single fact quietly rules out a huge number of the popular theories. A tool has to work the same way every time to be worth using. But these objects show real wear inconsistencies too. Many show little to no sign of the kind of handling wear you'd expect from a genuine working measuring device or a tool used every day. The Norton-Disney Group itself, after studying their remarkably well-preserved find, concluded that the amount of skill and time poured into casting it made a purely functional, everyday use unlikely, while the total lack of a standard size argued against it being a measuring tool of any kind. Meanwhile, other researchers who've cataloged the full known collection point out that the find contexts are wildly varied too. Some have turned up in military forts, others have been found in graves, in the ruins of Roman bathhouses, buried inside coin hoards, tucked into a theater, or simply lying on a riverbed. That's not the pattern of a single specialized tool with one clear job. That's the pattern of something whose meaning shifted depending on where it ended up, or something symbolic enough that it made sense to bury with the dead, hide with your savings, and leave behind at a bathhouse, all at once. Which is why a growing number of researchers, including teams working out of Belgium's Gallo-Roman museums, lean toward an explanation that sounds almost anticlimactic after all that buildup, that these were ritual or symbolic objects rather than practical tools, something used in private religious practice, divination, or local ceremony, likely tied to non-Roman, indigenous Gallic or Germanic traditions rather than mainstream Roman religion. That would elegantly explain the silence in the written record too. The Roman Empire eventually adopted Christianity as its state religion, and, along with that shift, enacted increasingly strict laws against magical and divinatory practices. Objects associated with folk ritual or provincial religious custom, especially anything that smelled of the old gods or local superstition to a Christianized Roman administrator, were exactly the kind of thing that wouldn't get written into an official inventory, or that might have been actively suppressed and left out of the historical record on purpose, not because there was some grand secret organization hiding forbidden knowledge, but because everyday folk religion of conquered and semi-conquered peoples rarely gets a starring role in the empire's own official paperwork. Ordinary people's private rituals almost never do, in any era. And that reframes the entire mystery in a way that I think is actually more interesting than any single tidy answer could be. We keep looking for the one explanation that will finally solve the dodecahedron, the way you'd solve a locked box with a single key. But the honest picture that the evidence points to is messier and more human than that. These were probably objects made by skilled provincial bronze workers in a region far from Rome's cultural center for purposes that were personal, local, and never meant to be explained to an outsider, let alone written down in Latin for posterity. Some may have served a genuine practical role that varied by region, like helping estimate distances, mark seasonal changes, or assist with metalworking techniques like wire braiding. Others may have carried purely symbolic or spiritual weight, buried with a loved one or hidden with a family's savings because they meant something that had nothing to do with function at all. The dodecahedron may not be one mystery with one answer. It may be 130 separate answers, scattered across 2 centuries and half a dozen provinces that all happen to share the same striking shape. That's the part of this story that the finally solved headlines never quite capture, and it's also the part that I think makes it worse, in the best sense of that word, than the neat conspiracy-flavored version. It would almost be comforting if there were one lost secret sitting at the bottom of all this, one ancient technique or hidden purpose we could triumphantly rediscover with modern scanning equipment. What the actual data suggests instead is that we are looking at the ordinary material culture of real people living on a cold, contested frontier 2,000 years ago. People whose private beliefs, local customs, and everyday problem-solving simply never made it into the official record of the empire that ruled them. The silence isn't a locked door hiding a secret. The silence is just what's left when history only writes down the stories of the people in charge. So where does that leave us? Genuinely uncertain, and I think that's the honest place to land. The Norton Disney dodecahedron is currently on display, and researchers are continuing to study its alloy composition and casting technique, hoping that each new find adds one more data point to a puzzle that's been accumulating data points since 1739 without resolving into a single clear picture. Every year or two, a new example turns up in a field somewhere in Northern Europe, and every time, it reopens the same debate, because no two of these objects are quite alike enough to prove a single universal theory, and no theory proposed so far explains every single one we've found. If you've made it this far, here's the question I'd actually love to hear your take on. And I mean this one honestly, not as a setup for a reveal I'm about to spring on you. Given everything we've just gone through, the varied sizes, the total lack of standardization, the scattered and inconsistent find locations, ranging from military forts to graves to riverbeds, and a written record that says absolutely nothing about them, does that pattern feel to you like evidence of one lost purpose we simply haven't identified yet? Or does it feel more like evidence that there was never a single purpose to find in the first place? Drop your reasoning in the comments, because on this particular mystery, the people who study these objects for a living are still genuinely split, and your read might be just as good as theirs. If you want to go down this rabbit hole with me again, There's a whole family of enigmatic ancient objects with the exact same function, unknown problem stamped on their museum labels. And next time, we're going to open one of those drawers together. Subscribe if you want to be there when we do, and I'll see you in the next one.